All right, hello Astro subscribers. Today I'm going to be continuing my layer series videos, and I'm going to be talking about the seventh layer. And the seventh and the sixth layer they're quite hard to talk about because they're the place where a lot of conventional values start to dissolve in your perception. A lot of people, obviously, they don't call it the layer system, but a lot of people, especially older people who have lived somewhat unique and difficult lives, have talked about a point in their life where they have an awakening or where they have a paradigm shift where they shift away from a consumer style mindset, which would be like the fifth layer, right? Ruled by Venus, sort of compulsive, organized consumption, into a period where they are very confused. And that would be the sixth layer, which is, again, ruled by Neptune. It's the conflict with desires, the conflict of desire with society, of other people. If you think about the fifth layer as purely going after what you want, then that's actually a sort of sociopathic mentality. Although it's a very pleasant sort of sociopathy. It's Venus, it feels good. It's a pleasury planet. It's a sugary planet, but it is also a very selfish planet. And a lot of people have had this awakening where they wake up one day and they have their, corporate job, and or whatever job they have, and, they've reached a certain point where they're not striving upward anymore, and then they're left with what's that line from Fight Club with Tyler Durden? The things you own end up owning you. If you really want a good understanding of the fifth layer, sixth layer, seventh layer transition, go watch Fight Club by Tyler Durden. Because the whole plot of that movie is the end of materialism. It's the breakdown of the conventional world and the replacement of it with something else in the main character's mindset. And Tyler Durden is actually him at the end of the movie. It's a reflection, sorry for spoilers, but it's a reflection of his own self. It's him, but it's a different side of him. It's a different layer that has been externalized and projected onto the world as this character. Now, the seventh layer is an extension of the sixth layer in that it is a place of confusion, but in a way, it's kind of the revenge of the fifth layer by being taken apart by the sixth. So you could look at the process as the fifth layer being the stable place where you identify as a consumer, as a person who is chasing desires, chasing the bag, as they call it. And then there's this disillusion, this flood comes, which is Neptune, which is chaos and confusion, and the conflict of desires with both your internal multiple selves and society at large. And then what happens is this Venus energy, this energy that seeks pleasure and identity, finds identity in the things you purchase and the things that you have, and all this, it gets a last stand. It comes back with a baseball bat. And it's the revenge of the materialist worldview. It comes back with a vengeance, and that vengeance takes the form of Mars. And the time frame associated with this, the sort of, what's it called? The layer of the natal chart that's associated with this frame of reference is the hour system. And the hour system is a base 24 system. So if you were to look at it in tempo, it would be 24ths of tempo, which is very fast. It's very like a jackhammer, like a drill. It's very high frequency. And, people in sort of new age circles that don't think very hard will say, oh, high frequency is better frequency. And in a way that this is true. If you look at the frame rate of a computer, when you're like, let's say you're playing a video game or something and or watching a video, the frame rate being fast means that you can see more detail, you can perceive more of what's going on, because if the frame rate's really slow, then it's like you can see the frames of the animation individually, and there's lag and it's jumping around. That's not helpful for perception. But what they don't necessarily talk about is the fact that if you have a very high frame rate, sometimes it can be like a train that's going really fast into a brick wall. And that's kind of what the seventh layer represents. It is the re-identification with desires. It's the suppression of that sort of confusion, that chaotic flood state of Neptune where the desires are in conflict with themselves and society. And it's single-minded attack of one pursuit, 1 hour, followed by the next pursuit the next hour, followed by the next pursuit the next hour. And there's a method to it, but I think most people can see by now that if you're not aware of this hour by hour energy, it's very powerful. It's like a racehorse. And again, just think of the 24ths tempo, like even faster than that. It's drumming itself on the inside of your mind. And it's got this single-minded thing. Every hour is a new goal, is one of the big 7 planets that the hour system that I referred to in my previous video is composed of. So you're just rapidly cycling through archetypes in this, ultimately what is an attempt to re-identify with either the materialist world or some other world that is forthcoming, that this process is a gateway into. So one way you could think about the 7th layer is what the old alchemists in the 1600s called the rubido. And the rubido is basically, they defined it as, or they used a symbol to represent it, which was a hot metal ore that is like reddening and turning soft into what's called cinnabar, or just basically molten metal. It's where it's becoming effectively magma, or recasting it into a liquid with heat so that they can then shape it and then cool it into a new level of organization. It's also burning out impurities. And another thing that's worth mentioning, so I guess to finish that thought, one thing you can look at in the, the 7th layer is a transformation into a new state of organization that burns out impurities. And speaking of impurities, I'd like to talk about some of the symbolism associated with the 7th layer and Mars. So obviously Mars's color is red. Mars is the Christian devil was basically an appropriation of pagan culture by the Christians, who are integrating various pagan gods and turning them into angels and demons and whatnot, depending on if they were more benevolent or malevolent from the perspective of the Christian faith. And the devil, broadly speaking, was some combination of Mars and Saturn that came from earlier pre-Christian traditions. And I'll get into Saturn later, but basically Mars represents fire and brimstone. Fire of the fire and brimstone. Saturn would be the brimstone. So it's Mars is flame. It's the devil. He's got the trident, which is Lord Shiva's trident from sorry, from Hinduism, and so it would only be fair to associate various parts of this seventh layer system with demons. And this makes sense too, because if you think about the seventh layer as sort of an excess or the end result of a materialistic frame, trying to hold on to itself through all of its contradictions, then what you would expect to happen is the thoughts that result from this seventh layer of perception would be excessive material thoughts. And most, if not all, of the sins of classical demonology are excessive material impulses. So, like, let's take wrath. Wrath is an extreme response to, it's an extreme version of self-defense, basically. It is the extreme aggression of the body defending itself, but taken above and beyond. So when people talk about minimum necessary force in self-defense, if somebody attacks you, you can fight them off of you. That's not a problem. But if somebody attacks you and then you go above and beyond and take revenge on them and try to wipe them off the face of the planet, then that would be, under most conventional moralities, would be considered a sin, because it's an excess of a natural process. Lust, greed, avarice, pride, vainglory, all of these things are basically demonic energies. And, I say that they're demonic energies because during the same time period that all of this thought was being created, in the Middle Ages and shortly thereafter the Middle Ages, in the early Enlightenment, when all this alchemical and Christian symbolic thinking was being mostly generated, there was no difference between a demonic entity and the behavior patterns that I just talked about. In fact, the seven princes of hell, which were created around this time too, were not created, conceptualized around this time, were just people thinking about the excesses of their material existence. Like, when does a material virtue go too far? And then putting a face on it. And that face was called, Asmodeus for lust, or Satan for wrath or pride or whatever, Mammon for greed, what have you. These were all sort of representations of this extreme materialism. And basically, this is the natural result of having a materialist mindset where you identify with your desires, which in turn comes from the fourth layer, which is what we're all born with, which is this animal seeking to sustain itself effectively. And this enters a feedback loop where they become aware of their desires, and then the desires conflict because you can't identify with your desires and still be fully sane, or at least not solely with your desires. So then the desires conflict, and then the conflict results in a form of intense, rapid aggression, which is a sort of cycling, rapid fire seeking, where they really buckle down on their identification with their desires, and this heats up the soul. It makes things that were suppressed, like greed and lust and vainglory, it makes it very apparent, because it's right out in the open. It's not being suppressed. You're fully honest about it. You're like, you know what? I have all these contradictions. I'm just going to embrace them. And then this process will ultimately lead into a regression into a more fifth layer sort of materialist, timid state, or it will culminate into the eighth layer. And I will get into what the eighth layer is in the next video. But I I need to make a sort of postscript on this video, because this is a very dangerous sort of energy to associate yourself with. And, this video, I do believe everything that I'm saying, and I fully embody everything that I'm saying, and but I can't necessarily recommend that you explore this sort of consciousness, explore really meditating on the seventh layer, the hour system, drawing out the sacred geometry, and sort of really thinking about it and meditating on it and embodying it. I can't recommend that you do that exactly, especially not before you know that there's something at the end of that road, which there is. But be very careful with this energy. This energy has the potential to destroy lives. I was not joking when I said that it was a fiery energy. And fire, for anybody who's seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, is not a net good. So, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video, this, exploration of how to analyze consciousness and how to analyze the lenses of perception in the natal chart as it sort of expands and flowers out into your life. And I will continue making videos in this series. Let me know what you thought below. And until next time, have a good one and be careful.